If you didn't know from the slides right here, this is using frameworks with the JavaScript API. My name is Rene Rubalcava. I work on the JavaScript team at ESRI, and I also work with the apps group. I'm pretty much do a lot of prototyping with JavaScript API for the apps group to make sure that everything kind of works in unison and harmony. And because of that, I also dig into a lot of the depths of frameworks that the apps group is interested in using with the JavaScript API. Also to help the JavaScript API work better with some other frameworks and stuff. So I have a history of digging into the trenches and kind of a reputation for it and doing stuff with frameworks. Some bad, some good, some better than others. So I've used quite a bit. Even from back in the Flex days, I used about half a dozen or so different frameworks for Flash and Flex and stuff, and using .NET and everything else. And it was always fun. I just really enjoy frameworks a lot. This session last year went really long. I don't think I covered all my, I was rushing at the end. Hopefully I don't do that this year. I think I've kind of maintained myself a bit more. I get pretty excited when I talk about frameworks, so I promise not to swear. If you're interested, the slides are on GitHub under my GitHub repo here, presentations. I try to keep all of our public presentations I do on here as well, so if you want to dig into those, you're free to. It's got last year's framework session as well. Go and take pictures if you want right now. I'll show this to you at the end of the slides as well if you guys want to see us when I'm all done. Let me move my mouse, sorry. There you go. All right, cool. All right, let's dig into it here. So we're going to talk a little, it's the agenda here. We're going to talk a little bit about some different options you have when it comes, not so much when it comes to frameworks, but just when it comes to working with the API and stuff. And then these are the main frameworks I'm going to discuss today. If your framework of choice isn't on here, I'm sorry. I think I'm not going to cover Cycle.js, maybe next year. I like Cycle, don't get me wrong, but I just didn't think it would fit well with this. Riot's still a little too new, and Mithril, well, Mithril's cool. I'm not giving it a hard time. So let's talk about different options when you're talking about JavaScript API and building apps. And it'd be remiss of me if I didn't talk about stuff that we provide out of the box. So we have all the templates available for you for the JavaScript API. This is all the stuff that when you're online and you want to publish your web map as an application, we have all these different templates and configurable apps that you can use. They are very useful if you're interested to see how to build an application that works with Portal. I mean, I don't know of a better resource to go to download and get information about how to write apps that work with Portal than these templates and configurable apps. They're available on GitHub. I mean, the web app builder stuff as well is pretty useful. I'll talk about that in a second. We have some out-of-the-box apps as well. So these are things that you don't get the source code for, but if you just need to do something like work with dashboard or workforce collector, navigator, things like that, they do their jobs very well. Trust me, don't try and rebuild navigator or collector yourself using your framework of choice. They just work. They do things very well. Don't reinvent the wheel. I've done it, and it's just not a very pleasant experience. We have other builders now, so we got like App Studio, right? I mean, you guys may have seen some App Studio stuff in the plenary. That's pretty powerful if you want to work with Qt and stuff like that. And Qt's not a very difficult language. The QML editor and all. I mean, it's not difficult at all, especially if you're coming from the JavaScript world. I think there's even a session about using JavaScript and Qt stuff, whatnot. It works out pretty well. A web app builder. Now, web app builder has been interesting. So I won't go to the link here, but Web App Builder, how many people of you here use Web App Builder? All right, okay, cool. You guys familiar with Jimu? I'm gonna say Jimu, yeah, familiar with Jimu. Jimu is a framework, essentially, that's what it is. Jimu is, means Lego. It's a Lego framework. So I think I had slides for all these and I just cut through everything. See, I know this stuff too well. So we'll skip through this. So Jimu is really its own framework, and it's a framework for being able to wrap all these widgets around these little widgets you can write yourself and have them communicate with each other and communicate with the map and everything. It does both 2D and 3D. If you're using Web App Builder, 2D will be 3x and 3D will be 4x. When they get 2D to 4x at some point, it depends on when we get 4x up to what they need to be able to do that. So if using Web App Builder really is its own framework, it's useful to get to know that particular framework, get familiar with how Jimu works and stuff if you're going to do it. I don't know Web App Builder very well. People keep asking me Web App Builder questions. Please don't ask me Web App Builder questions. I will direct you to people that know Web App Builder. I can help slightly, but if you're getting Jimu errors in the console, it's way beyond anything I can help you with. I'm sorry. So we have our own widget framework for the JavaScript API. If you weren't familiar, you weren't paying attention, we have a guide page that you can use to do your own custom widget development. Excuse me. There was I don't know if the session is today or if it's tomorrow, on doing custom widget development with the JavaScript API, where the guys that are writing our widgets gave a whole, they gave a whole session, or are going to give a session on how you can do that. And we have provided this whole guide page here so that we can let you know how we build widgets. If you want to build widgets the way that we do, you're free to do so. We call it a widget, well, you'll hear us refer to it as a widget framework, and it's really more of a component tool to build widgets. It's not necessarily its entire framework on its own, although by using view models and accessor and stuff, it could kind of be thought of as a little framework. It's based on Maquette.js, which, if you're not familiar with Maquette.js, is a very small, very lightweight little utility library for working with the virtual DOM. And it uses, if you go through their you don't need to know Maquette.js to do custom widget development with the API using our widget base and doing our framework and stuff. I'm just showing this as an example of how Maquette.js works. This is called Hyperscript. So Hyperscript basically has you do something like, there's a function in here called h. You tell it, I'm going to create a div, and that div, the second option is typically going to be things like class name, value, type input for inputs and stuff like that. And there'd be a third option for nested properties, or I'm sorry, nested components. So you have another Hyperscript as a third option. As you can see by this code right here, I don't know if I can make that any bigger, a little bit. I mean, this small component, okay, I get it. This may not be difficult to write if you want to write this on your own, but imagine trying to write a complicated component this way. It's not exactly easy. So that's why when you look at our custom widget development bits, we actually we use JSX for doing that. And JSX was popularized with React. And it's a way that you can write, looks like HTML in JavaScript. It needs to be compiled, and when it gets compiled, it gets turned into what you saw before, which is Hyperscript, that the browser can understand to do. It's really a nice way to compose components and widgets with things like React. I'll show us some React as well when you see it, but that's what Maquette.js does. We use that under the hood. We obfuscate it from you so you don't need to worry about Maquette.js, but I just thought I should bring it up so you should know what we actually decided on. And this is also what Dojo 2 is using for their widget framework down the road. They did all the hard work of figuring out the bugs and stuff, and we talked to them about it when we were thinking about what we would use and settled on Maquette, and it worked out pretty well. It does require, if you do our custom widget development, that you should be using TypeScript because we use JSX, and it's just the best way to make it work. I don't think the decorators that we have work in ES6. I have not personally tried it, but I think we do some stuff under the hood there that TypeScript will be required. So that's one thing as well. Don't think the TypeScript's required for everything with the JavaScript API, but if you're doing custom widget development, it's very highly recommended unless you want to write all that Hyperscript on your own, which I don't think you do. So why use a framework? So there's a lot of different reasons that people will want to use a framework. It simplifies the workflow, obviously, especially as certain frameworks make it simpler than others. Sometimes you just want the ability to create components very easily and be able to do things. And one popular thing that all of these frameworks have in common, especially now, is the idea of watching for changes or be able to update their state. And state management is important in a lot of ways for these things. And state management is critical when you start dealing with complex components and moving parts in your application and you start touching things and modifying properties, state management becomes really important in that case. Frameworks also allow you to have a team that's on the same page. Some frameworks are better at this than others, depending how flexible the framework is going to be, and we'll talk about that. So when you onboard a new developer in your project, you can give them the basics of how the framework works, and they're going to have a general idea of how to use the framework in your project, get development up and going pretty quick. So it's a quick way to get people going. Some challenges when using frameworks. The JavaScript API does use an AMD loader. With various reasons that we still do it, and a lot of it has to do with dynamic loading of modules. So for example, web maps, when we read a web map, we have no idea what kind of layers might be in that web map. We're going to assume you have a tile layer and probably a feature layer. We don't know if you have an imagery layer, we don't know if you have a KML layer or CSV layer, so we dynamically load the necessary modules after we read the web map to figure out what we're going to need to be able to draw the data on the screen. Most issues with it's not really with frameworks, but with the build systems that some of these frameworks use, is the fact that we use loader plugins. And this is, loader plugins kind of help us out when we need to determine what kind of functionality we have available to us to do certain things. So like in this simple case, you'd have a loader plugin for Dojo Has that says, you know, is WebGL supported? If WebGL is supported, then I can load this module. If it's not supported, then I have to load a different module to do things. Things like that are sprinkled throughout the API, and most systems, things like System.js and Webpack that can work with AMD, yes, they can work with AMD, they cannot work with loader plugins. And it's only because loader plugins were never standardized as the AMD spec, although they are in the AMD spec, they're just not like an official part of the AMD spec. That's the answer I always get back when I talk to these guys anyway. I just think they don't want to do it. So Angular, let's talk about Angular. I forget if I'm talking about Angular 1 or 2 here. Give me a second. We're talking about Angular 2. So Angular 2, technically the branding name I think they've gone with at this point is Angular, and now Angular 1 is being referred to as Angular 1. I think they really want people to just call Angular 2 Angular at this point. So if you use Angular 1, some things are going to be a little familiar here. Directives are still, they're in Angular 2. Directives are web components. That's the driving force here. And you'll see that's throughout all of these frameworks. Everyone's trying to solve the same problem, which is web components. And the only reason they're trying to solve the web component problem is because browser makers cannot come to a conclusion to standardize on how to make web components work across browsers consistently. Even to this day, it's been years and years and years, and they've been fighting back and forth. No one wants to be the first one to just say do it, except Google, who will do it whatever they want to do anyway. But things like that just happen. But that's essentially what all of these are trying to do, is it's trying to solve this web component problem where you should be able to write a web component that you can share across any application in any browser and live a very happy life. But we're not in that world, so that's why we have all these frameworks doing stuff for us. Angular 2 provides dependency injection, which is kind of neat, and we'll see a little bit about that. So if you're not familiar with dependency injection, you basically just say that I'm gonna have this class in my module, and it's gonna get injected during the runtime for you. It's cool. Yeah, I like dependency injection. It's pretty nice. I used it a lot with Flex had the ability to do dependency injection via decorators with some frameworks like Swizz and Robot Legs did pretty cool stuff like that. RxJS, so if you're not familiar with RxJS, RxJS is a library for doing reactive programming. So what is reactive programming? Without going into very long details about reactive programming is working with streams. So think of listening for click events. Instead of listening for a click event, you want to listen for a stream of events. And you may only be concerned with every 5th event in that stream. So you can pull out that 5th event. You can pull out the last 5 events that occurred, last clicks that occurred, things like that. Those are essentially how you work on it. There's a great page if you just do a search for, and I'll do it here, RxJS marbles. There it is. So there's a great page you can look at for how RxJS essentially works, where you've got this nice little interactive design here. Feel free to play with it. See here, so I've got my 1, I passed 60, that's 80, 100, 1. Oh, I thought it was an update. Oh, this is a merge, I'm sorry. You can find some really cool ones in here for concat, and the results are down here, what happens. It's a great little site. You can see how reactive programming itself works. Just think of these as streams and observables. When I get to, I'll talk about more at the end, some ArcGIS stuff, I think. It uses System.js under the hood with Angular 2 for their loader. All right, they were using System.js for their build as well, but they're no longer doing that. Now they're using, well, it's no longer the recommended way of doing it. They use System.js to do their loading of modules. So when you write Angular components, they get turned into system modules. System.js is it's supposed to be a kind of shim for ES6 importing of modules. And you can read all about it if you're interested in it on how System.js works in here. You see the System.js.import is supposed to represent the ES6 import of a module name. It works pretty well. It's actually not too bad. I kind of was digging System.js for a while and stuff, and it can almost work with loader plugins with Dojo, except they transpose the way. So AMD plugins have Dojo has bang, but theirs has Dojo. It would be Dojo has module name bang at the end, I think it was. Or no, the module name bang and then whatever the plugin is supposed to be. So it does support loader plugins. You can switch that around, however, and make it look like a AMD loader plugin, but when you do that, it has trouble finding the files. Like if you try and load text HTML file, it tries consistently to try to find .html.js. Can never figure out why that happened. I asked, and I never got a real answer. TypeScript. Angular 2 pushes TypeScript a lot. They're one of the main pushers of TypeScript development out there. And them and Dojo 2 actually are main TypeScript pushers for development. They work very closely with the TypeScript team, filing bugs, lots of issues, trying to get various things set up. Yeah, they really push a lot of the TypeScript development you're seeing today. So how do we solve the problem, the challenge that we had of trying to load the AMD modules inside of the Angular 2 with System.js? So last year, I showed an example of how we were able to figure it out, and it was a pretty cool solution. And what happened was that one of the guys that was on Pro Services saw this solution, was like, oh, that's really cool, I need this to be able to work, turned it into a NPM module that actually does everything we need to do now. It's called ESRI Systems. It's available on GitHub. The way it works is that you pretty much just register the modules you're going to be using inside your Angular 2 application using System.js. Like, for example, I want ESRI map, ESRI view, scene view, ESRI layers, feature layer. I register those modules, and then I just start up System.js, and I can start using, let me go to the sample here. I can start just referencing those like I would any other module. So we come down here, so here's our configuration. Once you do that, you can just start referencing the modules like this, like you would any other module inside of Angular application or TypeScript application. Neat thing here, if you have seen our TypeScript stuff and the things that we tell you need to do, and I have a TypeScript session on, I think it's Friday, I get very confused, I think it's Friday. You have to do like import map equals require ESRI map. If you export stuff as system modules, not AMD modules, you can get away with doing import map from ESRI map. It'll work in TypeScript with Angular 2 because it uses System.js under the hood, not AMD modules. So this is pretty cool, and what we're really doing under the hood here is kind of hooking into the System.js registration components for when it figures out where modules are loaded from, and we just inject our modules into its own registration, which is kind of neat, the way that works. So it's a great way to work with it. This is how you would work with the JavaScript API inside an Angular component. So let's look at what the Angular component looks like. So again, we're using decorators, and it's kind of odd. You could possibly get away with writing an entire Angular 2 application without actually writing code inside of an Angular 2 class. You can do everything inside the decorator. So in this case here, I have a selector. It's going to be my app, That's basically going to mean that I can add a custom tag in my application called my app. You can have styles, make them portable per component, so the styles will go along with the component with whoever you give it to. And you have a template. So I just want my template to look like. I have a main section, and I have a main and a section, and my ESRI scene view in here. So we can already see that I'm going to create a custom component for my scene view in this case. And then you just export the app component, right? So this is going to be my core component for my application that kind of gets the ball rolling. Now we have injectables. Okay, so I am going to create a service. So an Angular 2 and a lot of frameworks have the idea of creating services for serving out data and stuff. So in this case, because in the version 4 of the JavaScript API, the map has no DOM component, it kind of makes sense to treat the map as any other data model. So you can dump it right into a service. So I'm going to make this service an injectable, meaning that I can inject it into a component, and I'm going to have a map property on there. That map property is going to be a type of ESRI map. And then my constructor, I'm just going to create a default map here, right? So I have a service that's got a map property on it. Now things start to come together. So now this is where the dependency injection comes in. I'm pulling out some helper functions, helper methods and stuff out of the Angular core. I get my scene view, which I can do because I can do my whole system.js little hack. Here's my map service. So I'm pulling my simple map service out. And here's my component. So the selector for my component is ESRI scene view. We saw that ESRI scene view inside this component. So I'm just defining what this component is going to be. Again, we're trying to solve the whole web component problem. So I've got my template for what that component's going to be like. I'm going to give it a default height. And I have a provider. So you have to do these providers in order for the injectables to work. You tell the provider that you're going to have a simple map service type being able to be provided to your component. And then you're going to create your class. Now when you do your class, we have this view created that's got this event emitter for the output. This is kind of how you work with events in Angular components. I have an empty view for now, it's just null. And on my constructor, all right, so on my constructor, I'm going to have a map service, underscore map service as a type simple map service. Now, that is going to get injected into this component when it gets created. You don't have to instantiate this map service. It's just Angular 2 will handle all that for you. And then we have this element ref that I'm going to reference in here. This is how, you don't have to pass this in, but if you pass this option in, you'll get actually the root DOM element of the component that's being created that you can use to do stuff with. Which you'll see I want to do stuff with in here when I have this ng on init. So you'll see these ng things pop up in here. Ng on init is basically when this component gets initialized. I should be ready, when it's initialized, that means that the elements should be ready to start accessing DOM properties from. So I should be able to come in here and create my scene view and use this lref property here that I got injected into my constructor and get the native element. This is important here. You need to get the native element and get the first child from that native element. And then you do that, and now it's going to be part of your component. So this component is my scene view that's going to be popping up. Then you can pass in any other properties you want. Maybe I have a service for passing camera properties when I start my scene view, get the ball rolling there. I thought we had a sample in here, and I may have, let me go back to GitHub real quick. I thought I had a simple sample anyway to get started. I think I called it ng. Here we go. That's way too big. So here's a full application you can find on GitHub. It doesn't do a whole lot. It really just shows the scene view to give you an idea of how to get started. Here's our system config.js with Angular stuff set up. I just tell it what CDN I want to use. Here's my app. Here's my map component that we just looked at. And with a lot more properties, so I send the camera position in there. And my main TS, which kind of brings some other stuff together. So you can pull this sample in and see how it works, pull everything together. It'll just show you a nice scene view. Scene views are always beautiful. So that's how you get that working there. So, okay, benefits of Angular. Why would you want to use Angular 2? It has gone through a whole series of iterations since they announced it. Our Insights is built with Angular 2. They started Insights when Angular 2 was not very stable. They've made a lot of updates to Insights since they started building it. Those guys have done a lot of work there. But Angular 2 is stabilizing. I don't think there's been many API changes in the last release or so. I think things are kind of stable as far as the external APIs go. I hope it stays that way. But Angular 2 is kind of nice. I know of, talked to a couple people that are doing production development with it. I hear a couple people tell me that they really expect it to blow up in the next couple of years. I think it might. I think it's got a lot of push behind it. It's got Google behind it. It's got the Angular 1 legacy behind it. People can do some cool stuff. So it's really something I think you might want to get a look at. But if you do, those methods I showed you earlier using ESRI Systems JS and stuff, that's how you can get the JavaScript API to play nicely with Angular 2 to build your applications. Ember. Let's talk about Ember. Ember's cool. I have a love-hate relationship with Ember. And one of the reasons I have a love-hate relationship with Ember is that I want to hate Ember so bad because it's so opinionated and it's so in your face about it, and it's just, if you don't do things the way that Ember wants you to do things, you're just gonna end up in trouble. But Ember's great for teams. If you're working with a team environment, it's tough to beat Ember. It really is. Because they're so rigid in the way that they do things. You know for a fact that if you hire a developer that just knows Ember to work on your Ember project, they don't even need to know the context of your Ember application, they can get up and running right away. I mean, it really is fantastic for that. I cannot argue that fact. It's like New England. So Ember's focus is on web components. All right, again, they really work on this really hard to get this web component thing going. They just, I don't know if it's in production or not. Ember is working on a new virtual DOM implementation called Glimmer. And I don't know if it's even called Glimmer anymore. It's ridiculously fast. Their numbers that they report anyway are like just blow everyone else out of the water in terms of being able to draw DOM elements on the screen when state's being updated. It's pretty cool. It has a very robust add-on system. And here's one of the things too which bugs me about Ember. If you want to do something with Ember, like you want web workers, you want service workers, you have to install an add-on. You can't just start using them. You need to figure out how to get them to work in an add-on and then use these new features right away. But there's such a large community for this stuff that someone wrote an add-on for it. It's kind of funny too. There was an Ember concurrency add-on written, I think last year, a couple years ago, that basically lets you use workers and add-ons, workers in Ember, and you would think people that are using Ember never used workers before because it was just like all blowing things up. Everyone loved it. Concurrency out of the way. It is great, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the add-on system is fantastic for that. And like I said, it's great for teams. Operation Dashboard, written with Ember. Workforce is written with Ember. Open Data, written with Ember. And there may even be a couple other projects I'm not sure on that are written with Ember. We have other teams looking at Ember for their app development as well. They use it because it's so robust. The ability to write applications quickly is pretty cool. There was Ember workshop on Monday, I believe, that I know a couple of the open data guys did that turned out pretty well, and there was some good feedback from that. And the thing here, Ember started this whole CLI thing. When you hear people talk about CLI for React or a CLI for Angular, it's all Ember's fault because they wrote the CLI that is a command line tool that you say Ember new component, it's going to build your component and it's going to build your test for you. Notice how it builds a test for you. They really want you to test all the way. There's a couple of great videos on YouTube. Can't remember the gentleman's name at the moment. Writing unit tests for Ember. Just you can search TDD Ember. He'll be like the first result you find. He has a couple of fantastic videos of unit testing with Ember with TDD. They really are awesome. Like I said, we use it for our projects. It's served us very well. Some of the challenges, and this is what kills me with Ember. Their loader looks like an AMD loader, has defined require like an AMD loader. You would think it's an AMD loader. It is not an AMD loader, and it just kills me. And so that when you do AMD on the define function, there should be a property that's called AMD equals true. So you know that's the AMD loader. Well, they don't do that. They say define.pedal equals true. Pedal is completely meaningless at all. But it's just so you know it's not an AMD loader. And it doesn't work like required just Dojo loaders do. It's completely synchronous down to the metal. There are parts of Ember written like node components, but they're not. And it's very frustrating. That's so synchronous. But Ember has started to see the fact that there is a need for asynchronicity, such as building a web application that has an admin page that you don't want to write a single app for. You may need to dynamically load certain modules for admins that users don't get. And they're coming up with something called Ember engines to be able to handle those kinds of situations. They're rewriting AMD, I swear to God. So solutions. So to get the loader to work with Ember, to get things working nicely, this was my first project when I joined ESRI a couple years ago. Write an add-on to get Ember to work with the JavaScript API. That was essentially my first task. I didn't think I'd be able to do it, but we did. Ember CLI AMD. You can look at the documentation here to see quickly how you get it set up. You essentially just need to provide an AMD object to the Ember app. Tell it what loader you want to use. You can use 4x, 3x, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't even have to be a JavaScript API. It could be any AMD library. Tell it what packages are part of this AMD library you're going to be using. And then you just, you can have a Dojo config if you want. You don't have to, but you can. If you're using 3x, use the Dojo config to set async to true, because we set it to false for legacy support. If you're using 4, don't worry about the async part. You're good. If you want to use, and I recommend this a lot to people too when they're using the Ember AMD add-on, if you're going to deploy and you're using the CDN, use the web optimizer to create an optimized build of the parts of your project that are the JavaScript API. You get that custom URL back from the web optimizer. That URL is built version of the JavaScript API just for you. And you can use an option in here called output dependency list. It's a text file you can copy and paste in the web optimizer to get that optimized build. So you can always do that after the fact if you need that optimization. For 4x, we've done a lot of work where you may not even need to do that. We've done a lot of stuff for the layer files and stuff where you can load very little files to get your app up and running. And there's some other options in here too. You can look through the documentation. So we got that working, and it works really well. So this is basically what I just showed you here. You write out what the loader is going to be, give it the packages. This is the bare minimum you need to get it working with Ember. This is how you would use it inside of Ember. So there's Ember services, which I remember 4x, the map has no DOM, so we can use it as a service everywhere. I try to push this as much as I can because I think it's fantastic. Because when you create the map, it doesn't even load anything yet until it's added to a view. So it's just a very simple, lightweight object that sits around here. You can create dozens and dozens and dozens of maps and never even use them if you want. Just have them available for you to do whatever you need to do. These could be web maps even. So we create a map, and the service has a method called load map. So now my component, what I can do is I've got an Ember component that I can extend. It's going to have a class name, so you recognize this class name ViewDiv. We use it everywhere in the API, this ViewDiv name and class name. Map service property. So for this map service property, I'm going to tell Ember, inject a service, inject my map service. Notice I'm not calling them, I'm not doing, if I come back here, this file is called, it's under app services map, right? So if it's under app services map, I don't need to reference app services map. I tell Ember, inject a service called map. It knows, go to the folder called services, find a module called map, you're going to inject that module. This is one of the reasons that Ember is so widely popular for consistency. You know where everything is going to be because it has to be there. If you try and put your services into a folder called My Services, forget it. It's never going to find it. It's never going to know what to do. Don't do that, by the way, because you'll just be in a world of hurt. Don't try and be tricky with your folder names or anything like that. Just let Ember do its thing, and you will live a very happy developer life. When you get the map, you call the load map off the service that you got, so you can get your map. Then you just set the map on the element. That's what you do on did insert elements. So all these components have life cycles. So if you're ever familiar with like digits we used, right, in 3x, right? They had a post create method. This did insert element is very similar. The names should be, it should tell you what it's doing. That means that this method runs after the element's been inserted to the page, so you can start doing stuff. You have a create map method here that's going to observe for when the map property changes on my component. When it does change, hey, I'm going to run this create map function. So now I have a map. I'm going to create my scene view. This element ID is the ID of the Ember component, and it'll probably be something weird like Ember _ div 23, 22 or something. You'll never know the ID. You don't care. It'll give you the ID here. So you just pass that to Ember, or pass that to the scene view, and it'll attach a scene view onto your application for you. So this is how you add the component into an Ember component. ESRI map is now a component. Yes, it's the handlebars. It's not the little brackets. They still use handlebars to do it, and this is where the magic just kind of happens. I can actually show you a sample of this one. I believe, where am I at? So I have an Ember component here. CD. If I do Ember serve here, got that up and running. Ember's got its own built-in server too when you install the Ember CLI. All right, so it's going to go ahead and it's going to, you'll see little things pop up here, what it wants to do. We actually look at some of the code while that's getting started here. Let's look at the templates, application template here. I just added my little ESRI map to my application template. Now it's telling me it's being served on localhost 4200. So let's go to localhost 4200. I cross my fingers, nothing goes wrong, and I have a scene view. Add into my map. That's all you gotta do. And now with this Ember server running, because of the Ember CLI, any changes I make to my code, they're gonna automatically get recompiled. It uses something called Broccoli. Yeah, it uses something called Broccoli under the hood to do all the build steps. Broccoli's kind of weird, but there are lots of hooks you can get into in the build steps as well if you want to do some funky customization. We use them with the Ember add-on to do some stuff as well. So let me cancel that. So again, benefits of Ember, it's got a large community. It's got a really, really large vocal community. I'm actually going to Ember Conf at the end of this month as well for my second time in 2 years. Check it out. There's a lot of people there working on some very cool stuff. They have a flexible ecosystem. Basically, they have tons and tons and tons of add-ons. I mean, there's an add-on for just about everything in Ember, from components to animation, to WebGL stuff, to workers, service workers. I mean, they just got some really, really cool stuff. And there are people working on stuff all the time. So again, I think if you're working with teams, it's a great choice. How am I doing on time? I'm not going over again, am I? I got a half hour. We got plenty of time. React. So let's talk a little bit about React. I'm a big fan of React. One of the reasons I like React so much is that it's not a framework, technically. I threw it in here just because I kind of like it. Or else everyone will only have like 2 or 3 things to talk about. It's not many big frameworks out there, really. Its focus is on reusable, composable components. This is their tagline, right? Basically, you create a React component. You could, you should technically be able to pass a component around to anything you want and just kind of reuse it everywhere. I mean, I just copy paste everything I do anyway. I don't know how many people actually pass components around. Uses JSX. They popularized JSX. This is all their fault. They did it. I know the reasons for doing it. It saves you from writing hyperscript is essentially what it's done. So here's how you would, a React component looks like. I've got a state that I can set, right? So I provide a default state. I've got a render method. This render method is going to happen whenever anything on my state changes. It will call the render method. Never, ever, ever try and call the render method on your own inside of a React component. Just don't do it. let the state handle it. Whenever you call a change of state, it will do what it needs to do, because there is some very hardcore diffing algorithms happening behind the scene with Ember to look at the VDOM objects to see what the previous state and new state is. They know what they're doing. Don't try and call the render method on its own. You can see here I just use these little brackets to kind of do some stuff with my numbers in here and display them to a fixed number value in there. You can see an example. I think this is from the example that's inside the JavaScript API for React. You can look at that. They're composable, right? So I just use view.then. Again, I want view.then. I think if you saw some other JavaScript sessions, we talk about when you call view.then, that means the view is ready to be used. So I can do, I use React DOM.render. This is for rendering React components onto your page. You use this React DOM module with the render method to render them on there. This is the only time you call a render function, but it's not a React component. It's like a helper method to render React components. This is, if you started using React a couple years ago, you may not recognize this. It's kind of something I think was introduced a year and a half ago or so, this React DOM thing. They kind of separated out React core stuff from React DOM stuff because of React Native. So if you get into React and you want to start dealing with React Native stuff, React Native is really cool because under the hood, all those DOM algorithms and stuff that they got going on work cross-platform. They've separated out completely. It's a pretty cool thing to do. I think they were testing out some React Native stuff with story maps at one point. They didn't go with it all the way, but there was some very cool experiments going on with that stuff. So because React is not a framework, it doesn't care what you do to create components at all. There's all these other frameworks, all these other libraries popped up for state management. Redux probably being the most popular. So Redux took what Facebook's recommendation for a architecture of React components was, which is called Flux. And it's basically a way to, you have your React component, you have a state, and you have actions. And whenever you call an action, that action will do some sort of an update to your state, which would then, the React components are listening for those changes, update the state, and then the React component re-renders. Redux took that a little bit step further and built like a framework around this kind of architecture, but went even further than that. They have reducers, they call them, which basically keep everything immutable. If you use Redux with immutable JS, it works out pretty well because you're forced to keep things immutable in that case, and you have no choice but to use reducers to get a new object back with an updated state of some sort. MobX, I haven't really used MobX too much. I know it was gaining some popularity for quite a while. I've had a couple people tell me they really like it more than Redux. I have not had a chance to really dig into MobX though. Today, again, one of the most popular things is React CLI, which is called Create React App, I believe is still the name. So Create React App, basically you can install it via NPM. You get a global you can work with to write your React applications. And again, it's going to create your React application for you in the same way across the board every time you do it. So you create an application, and then you can start creating components for it. It's got a full user guide. We have guides on GitHub. So if I go to GitHub, ESRI, JS API resources, frameworks, we have guides in here on React with people that have done React. Oh, here we go. Create React App ESRI Loader. So you can, it's a sample how you can use the ESRI Loader library, which I'll show in a moment, inside of a Create React App to build out your applications using the JavaScript API. Why do we do that? That's because they're using Webpack for their build tools. So we use the ESRI Loader internally to do that. Now, there are some tricks to get Webpack to not build the JavaScript API, but have it ignore parts of the JavaScript API so it doesn't get munged up in its whole build system. And then you just use the CDN after the fact. I believe it was Create React App does not expose the Webpack config for me to do anything with. And I asked the Webpack guy about it, and he was like, oh, it's coming. I'm sorry about that. So this is how you can get around that. ESRI Loader. ESRI Loader is a great little library. Again, written by one of our guys. He's on Open Data team now. I think he may have written this when he was back in professional services. But you call this method Dojo require, and it looks just like it defines. So it's like require, but it's called Dojo require. It's a global method. You call that, and you can start working with the JavaScript API inside of your components, however you want to work with them. And here we have this component will mount. It's like the little bootstrapping of the ESRI Loader stuff in here. There's a lot of documentation on it. Well, not a lot. It's got some decent documentation on it. It doesn't need a lot. It just does very simple things. It's got one task. It lets you load the JavaScript API into any project that may use Webpack to do its build system. And that way it doesn't get all caught up with the Webpack builds. So one of the reasons you may want to use React, it's very popular. It's got a large community. There's a lot of people using it, and it has one job. It does that job very well, which is component management. Although it's very flexible and has a lot of ways you can use it, sometimes that can get you in some trouble. I can't really say it's great for onboarding new developers because then they have to learn how you're using React in your project. But you can also use it just to build small components that maybe you want to add into a JavaScript project of your own with the JavaScript API. It's pretty cool. It really was one of the ones I preferred a lot. Like last year, I thought it was really good. I just thought it did what it did very well. One of the things I've been liking a lot recently, just for its simplicity, is ViewJS. So when I initially looked at ViewJS 4, I think they did the 1.0. It had some odd quirks that I wasn't too keen on, but just the past few months, they've really done a lot of cool stuff with it and really simplified it, and it's really starting to take off in popularity as well. The community around ViewJS is really starting to grow. So again, ViewJS is one of those, it's not a framework, but it's very nice, right? It's used for building components. That's its job. Similar to React, it has one job and it does it very well. It's simple, it's small. If you only use ViewJS itself and you want to build your own custom components for a JavaScript API and then just add those to the UI to do things, I mean, it's only 20K, that's it. It's not big at all. It's not like React. React's a bit bigger. Ember's massive. Angular 2, massive. But again, those you're getting full frameworks. I mean, they do a lot more for what you get. Easy to integrate. So this is a sample of how you would create a Vue component that maybe you just want to add to the page to use inside of JavaScript API application. Very simple. You create a component, call it camera info. Again, we got this whole component thing going here. And then just give it a template. And just like most templates, it can have properties you can work with. I'm adding a camera from the scene view in here that I want to display information for. And then after I want to use it, I just say new view, and you create that component. And I'm going to give it some data, get my camera in here, pass that in, and I can just watch for when the camera property changes and update the camera property that I passed to the view component, and the view component will hydrate itself and redraw what it needs to redraw to show the new updates from the camera, which can be a lot of updates happening at the same time. So it's got this little data property for doing that. The accessor that we have in the JavaScript API simplifies this a little bit. We've even talked, there's some things under the hood that ViewJS does with its observables for watching data changes and stuff, which aren't 100% compatible with the camera, with our accessor. You'd never see it unless you do something very weird. But we've talked about maybe trying to make a little adapter for something like ViewJS, where you can say inject my accessor or something. We've talked about it. We're not sure when we'll get a chance to do it, though we got other things we need to do. But it's one of the things that's come up. And a couple of guys on the team really like ViewJS as well. They just think it's written. The source code for Vue is very nice source code. It's nicely written. I admire it a lot. They have their own CLI as well. There's a Vue CLI, uses templates. Every template is a Vue component. So I think if I got down over here. So here's a website for ViewJS. I didn't link out the Vue CLI, but I think it might even be under their Get Started in here. If I search for CLI, yeah, so they've got a CLI in here that they talk about. There's a lot of documentation for Vue. There's a lot more Vue can do than just some really basic stuff. It can get it has some pretty nice features inside of it. So basically, you create this template. You tell it, I have a template. This is what it's going to look like. All right. And again, I use the ESRI loader, which I used previously, to load my modules in here. And it has this mounted method. I wish there was a way everybody could just standardize on a name, other than it did insert element and ng on an it, mounted, but no, everyone's got their own thing. So we got mounted. Mounted basically means that the view component at this point has now been mounted to the page. You can start working with the DOM element and do certain things, meaning I can give it to my scene view. So I create my scene view and I'm good to go. So if we got a little, I think this demo, cross my fingers, is going to work. Oh, it's not a demo, it's just the source code. So I've got this project here, which you can look at, that creates my view components. Actually, not component here. Pages. I could have written this probably a little better with using layouts and stuff like that, but I just wanted to get a nice sample up and running showing you how you can do it. So we have this template in here. Ignore all this other stuff for the image and stuff like that, but here's my view div. So I got my little view div sitting in there. All right, so here's my template, now my script tag, and you can ignore this data bit here. This data bit here is using Nuxt.js, and I always say that wrong, it's Nuxt.js. I used that with the view CLI when I was doing stuff. Actually, this isn't using Nuxt, but it's showing me if I'm loading the page rendered from the server or rendered on the client. The head of the page is another method you can use here. And then mounted, again, here's my mounted where I create my map. There's a store. So with View CLI, you get a store for free, which is like state management, right? So I'm basically in here, I'm adding my map to the store. If I don't have a map on the store, I create a new map and then add it back to the store. This is great, so I can this store is global for the app, so I can use this anywhere I want. You can namespace your store, do some other cool stuff with it. It's really neat. I liked it a lot. Again, I'm using the ESRI loader in here to get things done. I'm using 4.2, but I can use 4.3. It doesn't really matter. It's got a destroy method, so if I need to destroy my map in between uses, because maybe I change my page, I can do that. One of the things I can do though with the store is I'm cloning my camera, saving it to the store, so when I come back to the map, I just rehydrate the camera with the previous state of the camera, and my scene view goes back to exactly where I left it. So if you've ever worked with single page apps and you've gone away from the map and you come back to the map and it's just like refreshed, it's back to the default extent and everything you did before. If you use the scene view, this is one way you can get back to the exact reference point where you left off when you transitioned away from the map. It's a great little trick. I do have a video out there on this. If you follow anything I do a lot of videos, stuff too on YouTube. You can check that out. All right, so I didn't put too much here on like benefits and stuff of Vue, because a lot of the benefits of Vue are the same as React. They really are. The community is growing, it's gaining popularity. There was like a JavaScript poll done or something last year, and Vue was like growing. And percentage-wise, I think Vue had the largest growth in the past year. So I only got a couple minutes here. So I'm gonna go through Elm. So I don't know if any of you are interested in Elm. I'm a big fan of Elm. Elm, in addition to being its own language, is a framework under the hood. It's all a framework. It's a language, it's a framework, it does all of really great things. It's a purely functional language. It's statically typed. So it knows what the types are before you know what the types are. So again, the way that I like to describe it is when you statically type your models, your data, you're describing the shape of what your application should be doing. It's great. If anyone you ever work with Haskell or maybe Erlang or something like that, all right, so those are pure functional languages. They are very nice to work with. It's very nice to work with types. Elm gets pretty close. Elm is not as good as Haskell could be, or as good as it could be with Haskell. PureScript is probably the one you go with if you're interested in stuff like that. I'm a big fan of PureScript as well. If I could fit it in here, I would have. Elm architecture. Elm's got a basic architecture. It has a model, has a way for you to update that model, and then you have a view to render what's in your model. That's how you create a model. You create a type alias. Well, okay, first off, I created a type alias for, say, a card, right? That card has properties. I'm going to type those properties. Notice that thumbnail URL is maybe string. That's an optional property. That means maybe I have a string. Maybe I don't. I don't know yet. Booleans, right? You get all that in there. Then I have another model that is a list of cards. It's basically an array of the card type. I have an update method. For these update methods, this is convention to call this MSG. You can call it communication, you can call it Alfred. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is how you're going to do communication within your application. So I have a message called select that's going to take a string argument. I have another method called update save. It takes a string and an integer argument. Another method called change is going to take my model, meaning I'm going to change my model for some reason. Now notice the update type signature. So I have two updates there. So the update with the colon here, this one, this is my type signature for this update method. Meaning, I'm going to take a message. That message is going to return a model. Well, let's get first off, let's look at it easy. It's going to take a message and a model. That update method is going to return a model with a command and a message, or a command that takes a message, sorry. The reason you have these arrows in between is that because in Elm, everything is curried. Everything's a function. Everything, data is a function. So they're all curried, right? If you know what currying is, it means that you can have a function that may take 5 arguments, but if you pass it 1, you'll just get another function that takes 4 arguments. Pass that one, another one, you get a new function that takes 3 arguments. That's how you do currying. So then you just do a basic if statement here, like a case. If I have a message of change, I'm expecting change to take a string model, which my original model was a list of items, then I'm going to have this command. Don't worry about command.none. It's just command.none by default if you're not doing anything special. So I'm just going to return the new items because everything's new. I'm just going to return a whole new list of models. If I'm going to do an update save, I'm going to get an ID and get a rating. Ignore the rating part. These are just a couple of things I'm using for. These are portal item ID portal cards for ArcGIS Online items. And I take my model, and I've got this little array here. I'm using the helper method to help me do this. So basically, I need to make sure I've got this bang array, and I'm going to pipe that into a helper function called and then, meaning that I'm going to take my model, do an update save, and then I'm going to do an update again, but I'm going to do a select on an item ID, and I have this whole method to pull out of my list of cards, grab the item I'm looking for to update that one single card. This is a lot more than you probably need to see, but let me get to show you how this actually would work. So let's go in here, close this, and I'll show you what the actual Elm application looks like. So this is the full Elm application, and if I run, let me double check my package.json. I've got a nice little npm run Elm script in here. All right, so now if I can remember where that is, Frameworks 2017, let's go there. Here we go. So it's going to ask me to log in. I need to use my JavaScript one. I've got way too many online accounts, as you can see. Okay, there we go. So I'm rendering portal cards on here. I'm not doing anything special other than changing what they look like when I click on this little edit thing. The idea here is I was going to try to make a vector tile style editor for you guys using Elm here. I just had too many sessions and plenary and all this other stuff to do. That's my goal, is to make a vector tile style editor using purely Elm, though, in the near future. So I won't go into too detail here. I'm like at the end of my time. But basically, when you create a view, the view is a data model. So you notice I've got this div function here that has a first array is going to be similar to like hyperscript, right? Remember we saw the hyperscript stuff. It's a function that is going to create a div. The first array is going to be things like the class or attributes of the element. And then in second argument is going to be the nested components of that element. You do the same thing here. Right, and these little things here, these are pipes, basically saying that I've got a function called showVal and another function called source. I'm going to pass the thumbnail URL to showVal, and then I'm going to pass that value into source. You can actually go the other way. It's funny, if you turn the pipes the other direction, it goes the other direction as well. But just like you expect, right? It kind of makes sense. It's pretty cool. Get back over here. There's a lot in there. Looking forward, Dojo 2, we are looking at Dojo 2 stuff for the JavaScript API. That's still a ways off. Dojo Core is still, I think I put beta here. I think it's still alpha. A beta's coming pretty soon if it's not already beta. Yeah, that's right. So the cool thing with Dojo 2 is they broke everything out into packages. So the Dojo Loader is a separate package from Dojo Core, which is where we're more interested in, meaning we may not even use the Dojo Loader for our stuff. There's a lot of things going on, there are a lot of moving parts. Check it out. Dojo 2 is going to have a CLI because everyone has a CLI. You can play with it now. TypeScript 2.2 introduced mixins, meaning that we may be able to do some cool stuff with our accessors and stuff, extending multiple classes. We look forward to future updates with TypeScript things. Notable mentions in here, Riot, Mithril, Pure, Hyperscript, Node.js, etc. Thank you very much. Cycle.js, Cycle has grown in popularity. There is a CycleConf some point soon. Can't remember when, but yeah. Okay, sorry, I know I went really close to time. I get carried away. You can find my slides at the URL at the bottom. You can fill out the survey, tell the survey that I just went way too long, and yeah. Questions? Yes. I have a TypeScript session Friday morning. I use the ESRI Events app to save my sessions, so I'm eating my own dog food here. I didn't write it, but I'm eating our own dog food here. Creating optimized builds tomorrow morning 9 a.m. Vector tiles 1 p.m. and Friday morning TypeScript 8:30 a.m. Yes. Any other questions? That was a lot. I know people, I'm sorry, there was a lot going in there, especially when I got to the Elm stuff. I was hesitant at putting Elm in there, but I couldn't help it. Yes. Yes.
What would be your basic recommendations to start off?
Ember. Is a fairly large team, more than a couple, like 3 people?
Like 5.
Ember. Yeah. Don't tell Dave Bowman, please. You know what? Ember is very large. Ember is very fast when it's deployed to production. It's not like a huge footprint when it's deployed to production. It will give you like a 3 gigabyte node modules folder when you're developing. But it produces great applications, efficient applications. It's fast. For all its complexity, it's fast. If you follow the Ember like standards and ways of doing things, which you're kind of forced to when you use Ember CLI, you really can't go wrong. It's great for working in a team environment. When we're doing dashboard and stuff, they were looking at how they wanted to build it and what to do. They evaluated a whole lot of things, and Ember just had too much going for it, and it really does. I knock it for stuff because things about it bug me, but that's just my personal bias for it. But it really is a great framework for working with teams. And I think some of the other CLIs, like Angular's 2 CLI, maybe the Vue CLI, when Vue really gains more traction, will also bring that kind of consistency to its development. But Ember's already there. It really is. Yes? You know, there were some people looking at web components for the developer site, like actually building out the site itself, ArcGIS.com and everything like that. And it's just too new. I mean, it's really cutting edge. You have to shim things here and there. Polymer gets pretty close, but even I'm really hesitant to trust anything Google puts out, other than Angular, which it's kind of out of their hands at the moment. But Polymer seemed like it got ignored for a long time until they did the new release like last year. But even after they did the new release last year, I haven't heard much. It's been kind of quiet on that front. I don't know if it's just because it's so stable and people love it, but I've yet to this day heard of anyone using Polymer in production. No one's told me they're using it. Are you using it? Oh, God bless you. But yeah, Polymer is the closest you can get to web components because it will build web components. You can do some cool stuff with it. And last year, Polymer was in my frameworks talk. You can find the GitHub repo where I kind of mentioned it. And I think I have samples using Polymer to do stuff. It worked okay. It did everything it needed to do fine. But again, Polymer using web components isn't itself a framework. You still have to wire everything together. And that's where Ember comes in. Ember just wires everything together. That's magic. Anything else? Yes?
You have an example on your blog about CycleJS, the ESRI CycleJS.
Yeah.
That it works with CycleJS. We can access the ESRI JavaScript API.
If I remember, yeah, I think I was able to load CycleJS via AMD without an issue. I haven't tried to build it.
This example is for version 4, right? Not 3x.
Version 4, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't do a lot of 3x stuff anymore. I'm really focused on 4 at the moment. I don't see why most of this stuff won't work with 3 though. The only thing that won't work if you're doing 3 when you try and do some of these things is trying to treat the map as a service, because in 3 the map needs a DOM element. So you can't really treat it like a service in that sense with 3x. Whereas in 4, I can create 50 web maps, have them ready to go at any time, and load them into the DOM as needed with the views. Yeah, so I got to revisit CycleJS. I really haven't used it in a while, but I know it's gaining traction and popularity. I probably should get back to that and see what is happening on that front. Anything else, guys? No? Okay, one more? Awesome. Vector tiles are tomorrow at 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. Primrose B. Yeah. I'm doing that with Craig Williams, who is the ArcGIS Pro Master. So if you guys are interested in that, he's great to present with. He does all the work. All right, guys, thank you. Appreciate it.